So what are you bringing in to the construction field, and then using that intelligence? And it can be in any industry. It can be in interiors furnishing to the big construction structural steel placement. And there are many things that are happening right now that is going to bring that into the forefront.
Perfect. Ian, it looks like you want to jump in there.
Yeah, no, I think because AI is brought in from an idea of what it could be, and in some ways there's some repeat in the thought of what BIM could be back in early 2000s, where there's this presumption that the software does this magical trickery. And in some ways, what it's done is to allow individuals, and it gives them access to tools and kind of a scalability of tools that you wouldn't have in kind of old manual techniques. But unless the person is kind of crunching through mentally what that means, so for clash detection, for instance, you get thousands of clashes, boom. Unless the person who is due to kind of go through those clashes and resolve them is behind that tool, all you've done is just generate loads of kind of treadmill data that doesn't go anywhere. And so for AI, it's a similar thing, that it has loads and loads of potential, but there's that combined staffing need, so the kind of the right people within the mix of organizations, and the technology roles that need to come in through this as well have to be really emphasized, so that, you know, if you're a client, you want some kind of AI analysis, there's a lot of questions, like the questions it raises. Do you have the staffing in your organization who can comprehend and work through those questions that it raises? I don't know, the conclusions. You need less this or that, or you'll need kind of to up, I know, the stadium, you need to up your hospitality ratio so you can serve more people during half time, and that could come out of the AI analysis. But you'll need some analysts within your organization that many don't already have. So the potential has to come through with that kind of human wisdom as well, which we are seeing a bit, but there's that as a little bit of magic button theories that we're seeing somewhat.
That's a great point, Ian. And, you know, I think, like you mentioned, it started off with BIM, and BIM was going to be the magic button for everybody. You know, you just say, hey, we're going to do BIM on a job, and click, you know, push the button, and all our problems solved. And, you know, are we falling into that trap with AI? Ian, I'll start with you, and then maybe Steve, maybe you give me some follow-up on that. You know, again, you mentioned we need the brain power behind that, the analysis, somebody that can look at the actual information and make inferences, make this system smart, and it's just not, you know, wholesale statements saying we're going to do it and then all our problems are solved. So are we setting ourselves up for a trap? I mean, like you said, BIM is kind of brand new, and we haven't really figured that one out totally. So are we kind of setting ourselves a trap of just new technology, new thoughts? Let you weigh in on that, and then we'll come to Steve.
Yeah, I mean, it is important, and it's, I wouldn't say we're setting ourselves up for a trap, but we've just been handed a new tool that's more economically feasible for us to use. And it's exciting, but it's like I get these impressions of like the futuristic visions from 200 years ago with, you know, Victorians walking on water with paddle boards and hot air balloons and stuff. It wasn't quite on the mark, and so AI, I think what a client's dream is, they can just say, give me a new building, magic button, and it can crunch their way through a building, and you won't have to contract architects, won't have to contract MEP, you won't have to go through planning. It's just painless and ease. And it's not doing that. What it's doing is giving you there's a lot of potential to give you better insight or better economics to achieve a vision. Very, very powerful tool. Kind of, we're talking about kind of that vast amount of server processing and vast amounts of information that can look through a lot of options and a lot of kind of potential ideas. And it is exciting, but it is a tool still, and there still needs to be someone somewhere making tough decisions on the feedback from it. And authoring it as well. Who's going to author the AI? It's not that artificial. There is an author behind these algorithms, and how do they work? What do they do? A lot of new questions that arise. Just like COVID planning. If you were to plan your office, did you plan with kind of a generative solution to deal with it? And did you accept the options that it gave you? That kind of, they may not, because you don't want to accept them. You want kind of an old school approach, which is more cherry picking. I want this because I need it to work.
Excellent. Steve, you weigh in on that as well?
Yeah, so thanks, Ian. Yes, Ian either stole my thunder or is already ahead of me, because again, Preetam said it as well, it's a tool. I completely agree. So I'm my background, like I've already said, is in technology, so that's my thing, and I strongly believe that technology should be seen as a tool. So I completely agree with Ian. I think people get carried away. Maybe I should be more excited. The things that are happening are exciting. Is the technology exciting? For me, no. I've never got drawn into the technology on its own. So I completely, just reiterating lots of Ian's points, really. It's about the questions. It's about the decision making. So again, completely, I often, like I've already said, work in the rail sector. There's standards that I have to review that are Victorian. You know, so there's and they're there for good reason why we do things. Some things still, not everything. Some things we've been doing for 150 years. The way we inspect, for example, a bridge. You know, the tools and technologies change, but the purpose and reason and root purpose of why we're doing it remains the same. So I think the other thing I didn't say in my intro is I teach some of the BIM standards, and I think one of the things I always try to discuss is what's behind the data. Why are we collecting this data? What do we need it for? What are the questions? I don't think they've been thought through. So back to AI, even if we had infinite budget, if I had $15 trillion for a project and I had all the resource on earth for technologically, that's fine, but it would still remain at the highest level. What are the questions we should be answering? What are the top decisions we should be answering and knowing? And if we don't know them at a top level, there's something wrong with the management. So, you know, I'll leave it there because I could go on, but I think it's trying to not get seduced with the technology. And so, yeah, I agree with Ian completely. Yeah.
No, excellent points, excellent points. I think we kind of hit on the investment that's needed to, you know, at a small part, just to kind of get solutions that work, you know, fundamental solutions. Again, we don't have $15 trillion. No owner operator is going to give you that amount of money to develop these systems. So again, what are some of the things that we need to be aware of upfront, challenges, risks, you know, to communicate to the owners? And, you know, again, some of this is, yeah, hey, this isn't a magic button. This isn't going to solve all your problems. And hey, yes, you're going to need some upfront investment if you want to actually go down this path. Annalisa, can you talk about that, you know, challenges and, you know, proposing these solutions and understanding some of the, you know, from an owner operator's kind of standpoint, the investment that they need to make, and understanding that it's not going to be an easy button where everything's fixed by just saying we're going to implement this solution.
Just one thing on AI, because we work on it for the last 2 years, and I completely agree with you. It's a tool you need a lot of guidelines. We start to work on AI to understand if this intelligence is more intelligent than us for the creation, for the design. But that was our first step. And what the AI show us, it's we need, before everything, to talk about the project with the owner to understand what we want, to understand where we want to apply the AI, and we understand very well the BIM is the basis of all of this development, because the BIM creates for us all the organization, all the data to use it to develop on AI. So the two things for us are really connected, and we use BIM to create AI, and in inverse sense, we use AI to create some information or some new form for the BIM. We understand too the AI for the creation and design is not the end of our work. It's just a starting point. We use that for a big project in France and in Russia, and we use it to create new form to respond to a program. The response of the AI was something really near to the needed. So the needed was the dimension, the position, the sun, but was so far to the architectural image. So we understand we need the people with brain, we need AI to go fast, but we need BIM to organize all of these things. And this kind of subject are not really simple to explain to our final clients who need just building. So to do all of these steps, one of our solution is to create some workshop with our clients to explain how we use all of these tools in a new management way. Because it's not so simple, it is not so evident for someone who think about building and money, because I have to send my building, someone, to understand why he has to pay something more and before the building is built. Because it's something really strange for our client to imagine you have to pay a virtual building before to have a real one. But in fact, that. And we need that to create some value. So that's our discussion about AI and using all that, because that's create some new questions about how we can explain to our clients what we do with all this technology for him, to create for him some new value, to explain, to show him the first building before the building is there.
No, yeah, excellent point again. Steve kind of hit on it earlier, and some of these processes, we've been doing the same thing for hundreds of years. And again, some of that's driven by our own process on the contractor side as well as the owner operator side. How do we push that thinking into optimizing what we're doing and why we're doing it, answering these big level questions on a project? How do we get everyone to sit down and understand that, hey, we may need to rethink how we do our particular business in this sector before we even start thinking about BIM and AI? Preetam, you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a very important point. And sometimes we see, and we shouldn't be underestimating anybody in the construction industry. We see clients and owners and end users are sophisticated. They understand technology. They want to use it. They want to be part of the process from the design to the construction, and they do not want to be surprised. And I think all of that also means that they are willing to invest a little bit. And of course, the investment is, as Steve mentioned, it's a little bit skewed. You invest a lot more in the beginning and start seeing results much later on. And people understand that. And I think, the AI, the use of AI also, it's not going to be this one magic button that's going to resolve everything. All AI technology is fundamentally rooted in training the mind, the artificial intelligence, to understand what to see, what to look for. If the training is not correct, it's not going to do anything that is even worthwhile. It's going to be a garbage in and a garbage out. And I think that's where the power of technology is. And I think one of the biggest hurdles in my playbook is that we have to take all of these technologies and make sure they are legal proof. The legal industry comes in the way of implementing most of these technology and turnover processes. If we can get that resolved, a lot of the things we think we can do, we can actually do. I don't mean to sound like a person beating on the lawyers, but many a times we know there are certain things we can do, but we are stopped or held back is because, oh, what are the legal implications of that? So I think we need to bring that industry in as well with us.
Yeah, that's a good point. I haven't even thought about it from that aspect of making these product legal proof, as you said. A lot of times, there's a lot of legality that goes into turnover and warranty and all sorts of things. So again, that needs to be at the top of our mind as well when we bring in all of these stakeholders. I'll go over to Steve. Steve, what are you seeing as some huge hurdles from I guess the whole kind of industry standpoint that we may not be seeing right now that we haven't touched on so far?
Yeah, so I'd agree again with legal. I guess the short answer is legal and regulation as well. So legal commercial regulation, and they are being addressed. So there is just to say there was a previous panel as part of the Festival of BIM and Digital Construction, which I actually chaired, which was about legal. So maybe look that one up. That it's being worked on, right? So we're not done. It's not a done deal, but it is being thought about. Let's put it that way. So I chaired that session. That was maybe a handful of weeks ago. So yeah, so certainly legal and then dispute resolution. So absolutely, it's it's that aspect of it. Legal, often regulation again, because typically I work more in infrastructure. It's I'm not suggesting there isn't regulation in buildings, but we tend to be a bit appropriately, let's just say, focused on it. And I'm not suggesting that people in the building sector are not, but it's sort of talked about more. Let's put it that way. So in the rail sector, we talk about safety. What's primary thing? Number one, safety, and then safety, and then things like cost, etc., come later in the conversation. And I'm sure it's exactly the same in the building sector, in buildings as well. But I'm just saying it's something we talk about. So absolutely, how do we prove to the regulator? When I used to work at the London Underground, this is well over a decade ago now, as a permanent employee, one of the things I was directly involved with actually was challenging the regulator or about our inspection regime. So I realised. Today we're more focused on projects. This was more about the operational maintenance, but similar conceptually, where we had enough data over a handful of years to actually go to the regulator and say, we think, or we don't know, that's the point. We don't think, we know with data and we can prove that this regulation from 150 years ago could be changed because here's the evidence. So it was about the inspection, how often we inspect something. So I think having that data evidence is something that's probably missing, lacking, or misunderstood. Whether you had machine learning or not, that would have been the wrong conversation. That's where normal traditional BIM comes in, about repeatability, consistency, trustworthiness of data, traceability of data, provenance of data. So I think the big challenge is about trustworthiness of data. I guess that wraps up a lot of it. Would I? We talked about machine learning. Would I use some of the data I have now in some sectors to train a model? No way, because I know it's not good enough. So I think that's the challenge: trustworthiness of data. There's loads more, but because I'm focused on data, that's the one I'm going to choose. So yeah.
Excellent. We're coming closely to the end, and we're going to save some time for some audience questions. But just to close out pitch, if you're king or queen for the day, and you have carte blanche on directing everyone, just quickly give me your 1-minute pitch on say, hey, this is why we're going to this enhanced turnover model. This is why everyone should follow you. And I'll start off with Ian. Just quick 1-minute pitch on why we need to do this.
Well, I mean, so I think part of it is what the original sales point was: cost efficiency. So there's that obvious one, and site safety. Those are like the bedrock ones, the standard ones. But I think a lot of it is also for design improvement. It's for opportunities that we wouldn't have thought about otherwise. So now in this kind of COVID-19 era, a contactless, kind of getting through buildings seamlessly without touching anything, knowing you're there without a key, and the contactless building navigation. And now kind of the new questions of city and urban planning are rising up this. So kind of where we're going for it. I know this isn't quite a 1-minute soundbite, but in some ways it's had some exciting dialogue that we as a society are going to have to answer. What kind of urban planning do we want out of this? What kind of public transport networks building experiences that we're going to solve, and technology is going to have to sit in the middle of it. It's going to have to drop and be in the middle of it, and AI is going to be kind of rooted in it because it's necessary. It has to be, you know, that building design in relation to population of air particle disease, quite exciting issues to solve. And I think we've got the situation to land on us suddenly, and gives a lot of potential.
Wonderful. And at least a quick 30-second pitch. Why should we move this direction?
I can you say again?
I'm sorry. Yeah, just a 1 minute quick kind of summary, bullet point on saying, hey, why should we move towards this enhanced turnover solutions? Just quick 30-second pitch kind of summary.
I think we have new challenges in our world in design and construction. The new challenge is to build something that's really very complicated. Now with the labelization, for example, with the new requests of our clients, to build is not too simple, it's too complicated. So if you want one reason to go in the new direction, started from BIM, for example, or AI, that's one good. And the second thing is, please remind when the client asks us to build better, to create new information, to have new value, new product, using information for new what we don't know, because we don't have a crystal ball to know everything will be our future. So when our clients ask that to us and pretend to start BIM from the facility management, remind we don't build the building from the top, we build from the basis. So now it's the time to create the basis and to improve really the 3D technology, BIM, AI in our construction, in our design. That's one point.
Perfect. Steve, quick 30-second pitch.
Very briefly, yeah. So why do we need to change? Automation, increases the efficiency. Automation is happening. We need to look at process for de-risking, saving money. We need to also be more resilient. So then again, thinking post-COVID or even before COVID, one of the things I used to focus on certainly was resilience and business continuity. Working in a more modern way and highlighting this can make you more resilient generally. So that's probably the one to take away, I think.
Excellent. Preetam, we'll follow up with you, 30-second pitch, and then we'll open it up to some questions.
I'll make it 10 seconds because it's a better way to build, and it is the direction we're going to progress in.
Excellent, excellent. We'll start with a couple of questions. Question one from the audience: what kind of limitations or challenges have you experienced with turnover or trying to implement turnover solutions? Let's go, Ian.
It's the trying to get the definition of what end users and clients want is, and we think clients, if only they could answer a clear question. It's not about that too. They're kind of guessing their users and their client and their business base too, and it's a lot of complication. So the challenge is clarity in what we want information our data to do. Software part is sometimes an issue, but not often. It's often trying to capture that vision, and before it's too late, before kind of everything's just wrapped up and concluded now anyway.
Excellent. Next question from the audience: why do you think there is still resistance to digitization, and how can we overcome this? Preetam, thoughts?
I think the resistance is ill-founded because once you see the benefits of it, once you see everything that you get that you are not able to get with the non-digital format, anybody who experienced that once doesn't want to go back. I think it is just that. It's just not knowing what you can get. It's 1970s when somebody would not give up paper files because that was easy access. It's just that.
All right, beautiful.
Actually, if I could chime in there too.
Please, please.
I think it's not just resistance. It's also just a bit of apathy kicking in, as in it's not, I don't want to do this. It's like, I'll just keep doing it the way it's doing. That maybe it has a bit of improvement, but everyone has the surety of just continuing things as they do them. They can't be bothered, or just apathetic to how they're doing things.
Can I just add something? So I completely agree with Ian. It's people change when they need to change. So again, I'll be very appropriate with what I say, but because this is being broadcast, but let's just say super efficiency and change isn't good for a lot of people as well. Knowingly, so Ian's talking about not people not knowing. I would suggest that whether it's conscious or not, making things ultra thrifty, efficient, and processized, if that's a word, or automated is, yeah, it's not great for everybody. So we need to communicate the benefits in the right language to the right people. So sorry, I jumped in there.
Yeah, it's excellent points. I'll come right back to you. Oh, go ahead, Annalisa.
Yeah, just one thing. We have to remember to, like, we are maybe engineer, architect, our client too. We discover with our client all of this technology. I personally never studied new technology. I'm not an engineer of new technology. I discovered that step by step the last 13 years. So now I can talk about that because now it's my word, but for the other people, maybe it's not the same. We don't start in this world. We are now inside, so that's the problem. It's not because they don't want to use that, because we are in the 3D world. How many telephones you have like that? So we need to be more patient and try to find the good solution for the right client, and not pretend they are already in our world. So that's another, I appreciate it, the problem.
Beautiful. Preetam, I think you touched on this topic. We talked about clients that are, technology able. How has this helped you in your business, and how do you see this difference when compared to working with non-tech savvy clients? What are some of the benefits you're seeing from that?
It greatly helps, and I think what we've seen is that client actually want to be tech savvy. It's what Ian and Steve mentioned. It's like it's familiarity with knowledge. It's knowing something that you already know, and keeping on implementing that because you feel comfortable in that space. Technology savvy clients, they bring in a new dimension. They actually challenge you, and they sometimes go back and prove it to themselves that yes, this particular process of enhanced turnover actually saved us 6 months. And they come back and sometimes surprise you with a number which is even more aggressive than your own numbers in terms of how much time can be saved. But yeah, I mean, the automation and everything, the auto industry for the longest was resisting automation for the same obvious reasons that Stephen mentioned. But robotics and automation brought about a quality enhancement to products, and I think we should be doing new things and as we move on, and I think that's where the messaging that Steve mentioned is so appropriate, and you'll get more and more clients to buy into that, the enhanced turnover solutions.
Beautiful. Last question here, and I'll open it up to Steve first, and I think it's back on that legality discussion. So in relation to the issue of BIM and legality, what exactly do they refer to? Are we talking data, which data are extracted, what documents generated are valid? Just kind of, can you speak to that just a little bit on BIM and legality issue?
So obviously, I don't know how much knowledge the person who asked the question. So yeah, there's an international standard called ISO 19650 or 19650, a suite of standards which is being developed. One of the ones I teach, which is quite lucky, but within there we talk about an information protocol. So it's not it's prescriptive. ISO 9650 Part 2 it's prescriptive in what people need to consider, what the different parties involved need to consider, the appointing party or the client, as it were, the lead appointing party or the main contractor perhaps. But what it isn't highly prescriptive, it's a framework. So the answer is I can't answer the question in that way, but there has to be an information protocol. So the appointing party must define what they want, if that makes sense. So there's a high expectation. People know people know their stuff, basically. So if there's an organization commissioning a new nuclear power station or a new high-rise building, whether we do it digitally or on paper, they should know what they're asking for, shouldn't they? At some level, or the experts who deliver it should know what they're asking for. And that's what the standard emphasizes, that people who have the specialism should know their stuff. It isn't highly prescriptive to say this is the type of model, that is the type of model. Does that make sense? So I'll leave it there. So it's more a framework approach, saying you need to sort yourselves out and define what you need. That's, I'm paraphrasing it, but that's the clear message, okay? Which is great. So people need to think about it.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think we'll leave it there. Preetam, Annalisa, Steve, Ian, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for the points of discussion. And again, it was an excellent discussion, much needed. Again, what we're doing here, openly talking about it and pushing the industry towards the solution is what is right, what we needed. We cannot talk about this stuff enough and get in front of it. So again, I want to thank you. I want to thank the audience for being here with us and asking those wonderful questions. And please do stick around for Steven's presentation. And I'll turn it over back to Alex.
Thanks so much, Andre. We're now going to have a presentation from Stephen, who will be discussing creating a geospatially enabled information ecosystem. Over to you, Stephen.
Great, thank you. I'll just make sure you can see the right screen. Is that the right one? Yes, full screen. Okay, so thank you. Thank you, and it was a great panel session, by the way. This is obviously a separate session. So just very sort of high level, if you like, overview of a geospatial and BIM and how they work together, how they play together in that way. So my name is Stephen Eglinton. I'm representing a company called Geo-Enable, and we have a brand which is called BimEnable. The reason is a lot of people we work with have nothing directly to do with geospatial, at least that's what they're asking. So it's a sub-brand. I also teach on behalf of the Institution of Civil Engineers. So I teach their BIM courses and other courses. I also have a affiliation with the British Standards Institution, and I teach some of their BIM training internationally. So there's a lot going on in BIM. And there's geospatial, particularly things like GIS and other technologies, which are on a very close parallel to BIM, or at least some of the core concepts of BIM. So we'll just discuss it here, and the purpose of this presentation is to show you maybe where you can read more resources. There's some websites and free online resources I mentioned. So in that way, it's to get people to think about the two topics and how they work together, rather than be conclusive in that way. So again, that's me, represent different things. Out of interest, if you didn't see the previous panel, just to say my background again, my whole career has been in information management, originally geospatial, and now it's more all information, all data, typically at large scale. So I have an information background. And again, maybe it's not relevant if you come here to listen to the topic, but again, just to give you some context, originally my background was in environmental biology. That's what I studied, and initially my first role with the central UK government about 20 years ago now was as a cartographer. So I was a professional map maker, and then I got into GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, and that's been a large part of my career, about the mapping technology, what you do with it, visualizing, spatial analyses. The demand for data in that sector is quite high, and again, that's how I got into what I do now, because a lot of my career was actually trying to find the data, get the data, cleanse the data, check the quality of data sets that we were using. So concepts like metadata and sharing data was a big part of it. And now I'm involved with, like I've already said, BIM. So yeah, 20 years experience, most sectors. I guess the big turning point, I show this one here because we're talking about geospatial and BIM. Certainly, particularly since I was working at the London Underground, so I was a GIS manager there up until 2011, I think, and then I've done consultancy and training since that point. But the point is, they're focused on engineering. It's the railway, the metro system in London, if you're not familiar with the London Underground. And we were focused on projects, so the construction projects and the operation and particularly the maintenance information and the asset information, the physical asset information, and how these work together. So, and how we visualize them, and you can see an example here. So that was a major turning point for me because I already had a geospatial. Then I was starting to move into areas that we call now BIM, so about the information quality and the structured process around it. So again, essentially summarizing all of that, my whole career, what is the common thread? It's hard to find one sometimes because I work across most sectors. It's all been about managing data, the right one now, and the visualization, the use of data. So again, hopefully because I have a cartographic background, a mapping background, I'm always pretty focused on how data might be visualized and used. That's something I'm focused on. Oh, something falling down here. 1 second. So I think the main thing is that people have to actually be clear about the actual use of it. You know, the actual use of data, what it's going to be used for. Do people ask questions about? Sorry, you can hear me. Oh, is it falling? And I think the main point is that people often don't think long term because that's not what their focus is. That's not their job. So you know, if someone gets traditionally paid for, let's say, doing a survey, a measured survey, for example, then that would be a certain specific skill, and obviously it is, and it's a high level of skill, but it's, you know, it wouldn't necessarily be the same person that would use the data in operation and maintenance. So, and that's starting to change now. We're starting to see that, you know, different skills converge, a conflation of sort of, you know, someone doing a survey may also produce visual products as well, visualization. So again, that's sort of where I've moved, if you like, in that way. So let's talk about BIM and geospatial and how they work together. Just some roles I've had, again, are very, very varied. It could be enterprise architecture, which is more an IT concept. It could be other aspects of IT. So these are all roles that I've held. So again, they're all about data, essentially, at some level, but often strategic. What we're looking at today, and the theme of today, is about how we add value. So again, this isn't necessarily specific to BIM and geospatial, but how do we add value to the data? A lot of people talk about data, whether it's geospatial or whether it's in a BIM context. Data is a means to an end. Data has some value on its own, but it has greater value when it's brought together, and perhaps we'd call that information, when we know what we're doing with it and we use it to create things like insights. That's business dashboards, analytics, for example. Again, that has great value as well. So one of my previous slides, I showed you sort of dashboards. That's a representation. There's a lot more value if we think genuinely long-term about how we're going to retain the data, reuse the data, distribute the data in the future to other people with different levels of skills, perhaps, than the people that captured the data in the first place, and what decisions they might be making with it. So again, we need to be very careful on that data isn't reused or repurposed in a way that it wasn't intended to do so. And I guess, particularly with geospatial, the immediacy of reusing data and using it inappropriately might be quicker, in the sense that if something is in the wrong place or doesn't look right, so geospatial being obviously anything that's survey or map centric, you're going to see it, hopefully. I guess the risk is you wouldn't see it and you'd still use it, but often the risk, you know, there's often you can see the challenges. But this kind of rigor, so we're very good particularly with GIS, with having things like metadata. So that's data that describes data about data. You might call that sort of an information catalog as well. Well, that's a key part of that kind of sector, particularly of GIS and geospatial. We're seeing these themes now broader and more widespread in the BIM area. So I'll come back to geospatial, but just taking a step back, if you're new to BIM, so what is BIM? Well, there is an international standard that describes it, but certainly what we can agree it's not alone is 3D GIS or 3D CAD, so 3D design. That's a core part of it, and this is BIM according to the international standards, ISO 19650. Some people have different interpretations. They might consider it 3D model, which would not be wrong in the traditional sense, but I mean BIM in the sense of the international standards, ISO 19650. And we mean a data information management broader. It's not only for buildings, for sure that's the case, particularly as I tend to work in things that are infrastructure, so that's absolutely not the case. Think of sort of building as a verb, as in construction. It is around information modeling, it is around information management. Formally within the standards we mean building information modeling, that's what we mean, but some people might say management. That's not as it is in the standards, but conceptually that's similar. And it's a whole process. It's about reliable information production. It's about creating better information management. That's not what it formally means, but if you think about better information management for the built environment, that's what we're creating with the process. Now, while I'm sharing you some thoughts about sort of BIM here, the clear thing is that it's about making decisions, and you'll see that this could be common to any information set, whether it's geospatial or not. So that's the whole point here. It's about decision making. So BIM, according to the standards, gives me the rigor, the structure, the vocabulary, the focus that we haven't probably had in the geospatial sector before. Not the common language, let's say, across different sectors. So this is where BIM can add value to geospatial and vice versa. And there's obviously more going on, but these are the two aspects that get discussed a lot. So, you know, within the BIM standards, we talk about decision making, taking action. We need quality information. Data visualization may be part of that, and often is a core part of that. Or clearly, if BIM is about the content for a lot of people, so it's about a lot more than that to me. It's about the information governance. But anyway, if we talk about BIM, often people think about the content creation. Geospatial can often be considered the context, or providing wider context. So what about GeoBIM? Well, that's not a formal term anywhere. It's worth mentioning it, I guess. Some people have used it to sort of brand different activities, and I guess that's good in the sense of getting people to talk, maybe getting people in the same room. Certainly I would sit in the middle there as far as my skill sets, and then there's other data sets. But just looking at the points on the right there, what about other data types or data sets? So there's geospatial or mapping or survey data. How about others? You know, there might be finance. You know, that might be a critical piece of information I need to link within a model, within a project. How about some regulation information? How about legal information? You know, they're not mentioned there. So the only reason I'm mentioning GeoBIM here, I understand it's maybe good to get people interested, but certainly it's not my focus to talk about GeoBIM as another concept. It depends who you talk to, the last 2 points there. Perhaps, is it another term that constrains the conversation? So if I run a GeoBIM event, I would only get geospatial and BIM people there. Maybe we should be talking broader. I don't know, I'll leave it with you. I'm sitting on the fence there, but certainly I wouldn't talk about GeoBIM necessarily. I'll talk about a broader concept. But BIM, something we can agree on with BIM is around the actual, you know, the fact that it's all encompassing. It does and should cover the technology, the enabling technology, the data, the policies, the process. And again, this would go also with geospatial activity. This is one of my sort of takes on it here, is with regard to, if we just focus on BIM for a moment, and again, we have the standards. all of these aspects need to be covered. Do we have the right skill sets? Do we have the right policies? We often focus on a project, but actually it's also about whole life asset management. In this case, we mean physical asset management, and it's about the digital asset. Now, the information, that is the data, the models. Clearly, some of this would be geospatial. So it depends on your take whether geospatial is part of BIM. Is BIM part? Could some parts of BIM be geospatial? In my mind, they're all conflated, and we need to take a different approach. It's a high-level approach around information management. But being respectful to the skill sets, that's where we can talk about people with design and CAD background, maybe with BIM, if they would call it that for 3D modeling, and more the people that would have been my sort of background, whether it be GIS or remote sensing or geomatics, which is things like survey. We need to be aware of their skills. It's often the softer side of it, if you like, not the technology side, that often I believe needs more of a focus to bring these things together. There's been a lot of activity within the UK around this, certainly with BIM to make efficiencies. Again, I'll share these slides after if people are interested. Within 2011, there was something called Government Construction Strategy. There's since been other documents, and there's been a lot of activity, which I'll briefly talk about today, but that's not, I guess, the focus of this, but one of the closing slides I'll share you. But this is where we've come from on the journey of talking about BIM, particularly in the UK. There's other terms that you should just be aware of. Certainly VDC, virtual design and construction, not something I'd typically use that language in the UK. I know some people will, but it depends what sector. Maybe that's used more overseas. Digital construction, that's what this festival is called, BIM and digital construction. I would talk about digital engineering, which is obviously maybe a whole life approach. Digital transformation, digital twins. Now, this is where maybe, again, people might think it's another terminology, but this is where we are seeing traction with that term as what you get as the output for bringing our skills together and our technologies together and our data together, is we're creating digital twins. So again, it's not focused on that today, but certainly geospatial and BIM and lots of other concepts, Internet of Things and other concepts, in my mind, would all come together or conflate within the digital twin concept. So if you are a geospatial professional, that's maybe one to look up. There's a lot of core concepts that a geospatial professional would already have that can add value. So BIM is not only about the technology, it's there's technology aspects that enable the innovation that we need and the control, the governance that, again, we've probably not had a consistent approach to that in the geospatial community. At a strategic level we have, but it would be project by project, it would be company by company, organization to organization. It's never been quite as it should have been. Now BIM helps sort of streamline and systemize and structure and allow us to replicate an approach in a way that perhaps we haven't had before. And again, it's about whole life. This slide is just an order of magnitude of how long we might be thinking different phases of an asset's life. So if you just look, perhaps plan, this may be on infrastructure, for example, may or may not be 5 years. It depends if we think about some rail assets. Or perhaps some energy utilities, for example, or indeed some buildings. That we're gonna use this asset where we say operate and maintain for a long time. It may not be 100 years nowadays, but certainly there are things that we use. London Underground is 150 years, for example, and that's where I used to work. So you'd be pleased to know not all the assets are 150 years, but we replace them. But yeah, some will be. There'll be some tunnels, some bridges. So it's just being appropriate about maybe there's a life to the asset and how long is it. That will vary depending on what the asset type is, dramatically, depending exactly what the system or product or asset is. So again, we can't have a blanket assumption, perhaps as I did on the last slide. We need to be very careful. What is the life cycle? And we need to consider these new topics. So, geospatial can add value to BIM and vice versa. I've already made that point, but these are some of the topics to look up if you're not familiar with them at the moment. Certainly Internet of Things. So we talk about in digital twins about a representation of a physical asset with this, you know, if you like, I call it a feedback loop, but some way of keeping the data maintained. Some you know, so cybernetics would be where you learn from what's occurred. We need sensors to do that. We need some way of maintaining the data. Internet of Things is about sensors. Often it's about where we need to know where they are. Smart cities and future cities are broader concepts, but align with the thinking. Digital twin we've talked about. Within digital twins is geospatial and particularly GIS and other concepts for sure. So again, they're actually coming together, these concepts. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, virtual reality, augmented reality. Again, these are other things to look up. There's a whole presentation just on these, so I won't talk about them, but they need good information, both of these concepts effectively, you know, and I'm sure you know what they are anyway. Within the international standards, there's things developing fast. In fact, these slides need updating because the ISO 19650 Part 1, Part 2, and Part 5, so where it says Security PAS 1192 Part 5, there is an ISO 19650 Part 5 out now. So these are standards, BIM standards, they talk about information management. So I'm not going to read them all out. If you're interested, certainly you can look them up yourselves. Likewise, you can go to BimEnable.com. We've got some information on that there for free, or UK BIM Framework is the other place to go. So, but they're about information management. We see spatial as an enabler. So just an example, if we focus on the sort of the actual construction and design phase just for a moment. In the UK, we've got RIBA, which is the Royal Institute of British Architects. Now they have a RIBA, they have what's called a plan of works, which you can see on the screen here. Now, as of 2020, which is quite interesting for me, you see phase 3, the yellow one there, we've got 0, 1, 2, 3. So 0 is strategy, so that's before you're actually building something or thinking about it, and 7 is use. So again, that interests me. That's obviously the use of the asset. The change has been that we've got spatial coordination there. So that's a change to the terminology. So, and it says to emphasize that this stage is not about changing design concept. Instead, it's about the lead design in managing information until the building is spatially coordinated. So, okay, maybe it might seem a small thing to people that use that stage for that anyway, but it's a huge thing if you think I've got it there in black and white that we can add value, people with geospatial skills more than ever. That's already been the case. It's maybe not been explicit enough in some of the previous BIM standards. We talk about georeferencing, it's one of the older standards. We used to talk about volumes. We talk about sort of the federation strategy now, but which may or may not be on geometric volumes, but we need people with the right skills to handle that data. You know, I'll often talk to people who aren't even sure what a volume is. So, you know, everyone has a different level of skill. We just need to be appropriate and not go into too much detail initially. Again, I'll just speed up so we can have some questions here, but just, you know, pointing you in the right direction of where to go as far as you know, looking at the standards. Oh, I think it's frozen here. Let's go back. So I think that's reloading. Just while I reload that, I think the interesting thing is there's different places to go. Well, what we talked about on the slide that I'll bring up now, is we used to talk about, particularly in geospatial, we used to talk about spatial data infrastructure, or SDIs. Now, that was the nearest we got you know, and there was a spatial data infrastructure organization, but it was always very, if I was going to say niche, but it was in some way quite a focused, so you should be able to see that again. Spatial data infrastructure will always, as the name suggests, focus on spatial data, which is fine. That's what it was for. And we saw some, you know, some activity, maybe at a personal first-hand experience, maybe at an organizational level rather than a governmental level. So it was about structuring data. It was about, in this case, spatial data. It was about having a sort of an approach that was strategic, long-term, bringing things together, utilizing master data management principles, if you're aware what they are from sort of an IT sector. Now, you know, that has evolved. Now, the GSDI, this organization existed, I think did a very good job, because now we're seeing spatial data infrastructures at a national level. These are just some, and I could barely fit them on. So these are national or potentially transnational, but maybe not on here, the United Nations, for example, of portals of geospatial infrastructure to find data. This is geospatial data, the representation of data, report on data. European directive called Inspire directive also helped on this. The example there I've shown GeoSerbia at the top right there is obviously from Serbia. So that's another great example. But the point being, it needs data, right? So we're having this structured approach that we need data for. And BIM helps us feed. Now, within the BIM standards, we talk about common data environment. So, and again, you can read the standards. ISO 19650 Part 1 and Part 2 will tell you all you want to know about what a common data environment as far as we're concerned within the standards. But certainly it's about structuring data, all information, and handing it over. So these obviously, you know, geospatial and spatial will be within that mix. So again, we've got this context, a broader context through a common data environment that we probably didn't have before. Even if we're using a SDI, spatial data infrastructure, I probably would have had trouble getting the data and maintaining the data. That's what I see a CDE gives me. Just to say, I will be answering questions in a moment. I'll just finish up my slides. So again, if you've got any questions, type them in. If I don't get around to answering them today, then obviously we'll take them offline and get back to you directly. So if you've got any questions, please ask. So we need a common view. How do we get people to talk together, whether it's BIM or geospatial, which is the focus today, or whether it's broader? Often I'll talk to project managers. Construction project managers. I'll often talk to IT professionals. I'll often talk to architects, senior managers I often work with that don't have a technical, in whatever you want to mean, whether it's technology technical or engineering technical or another type, that's not their job. So we have to be very careful with the language, appropriate with the language, try not to use too much jargon. Here's a little bit of a joke slide I like to use from GIS background. Just off the top of my head, I've put some terminologies from GIS or Geographic Information System. I suspect, and if you don't have that background, you wouldn't know for sure what most of them mean. You probably have a guess at most of them. But we do use, and again, I'm not picking on GIS because that's obviously my background, but it's just interesting without even trying. There's lots of jargon that we might use. So a lot of people won't know what metadata means, for example. You could argue they should, but they don't. It's not a common term. So we need to be very, you know, appropriate about how we convey the things that we're looking for in BIM. You know, so again, GIS is a black box. Maybe BIM is a black box to a lot of people, you know. And a couple of jokes there is we have something called a donut polygon, island polygon. Just one very, very quick example is I was working on a project in London some years ago now for the King's Cross redevelopment, and I wanted information for building footprints. The person I was working with who was providing me that information had CAD specialisms, and I meant something else by polygon. So long story short, I was asking for polygons, which is an area for me. I'm there on the left there, the GIS. He had a background in obviously CAD and design, and we mean something different in CAD. So it has to be a regular, it has to be a symmetrical, if we go back to here, it has to be a symmetrical shape, whereas in GIS it doesn't. So again, even the language between two, in inverted commas, geospatial professionals, you need to be very careful on the language. Are we defining things correctly? How do we have that conversation? How do we learn from that? So now I'm aware, to be absolutely clear, maybe show examples. Maybe I should have physically shown what I was looking for. We sorted it out quite quickly, I have to say, but still we need to be clear. And here's some examples of how we can get engagement. So again, we might have some kind of portal. This is where GIS and geospatial can add value to particularly to BIM. Often some of the BIM examples you see are often actually GIS portals. It's a way into the information, a way of sharing the information. So these are from Esri. Some other things to think about is exchanging the data. Again, this is for you to look up, but it's being worked on, let's put it that way. And the main point on this slide is at the bottom there, Building Smart International is focused on the BIM standards, particularly IFC, which is a way of structuring data, including geometry, and OGC, which is Open Geospatial Consortium, which is a obviously focused on geospatial, particularly standards like WFS, WMS. They're collaborating, they're working very closely together to how do we share information across the different domains and how do we make sure we standardize things. And just in the interest of time, I'll just jump ahead here. There's a couple more slides that my message has come across, but if you want them, just further reading about how do we get there. Most of these documents here are quite current. I'll flash through them now. Obviously, you can look at them up in the slides with the links afterwards. But if you want to learn more about BIM, geospatial, how we bring things together, where I would look to think about the interoperability challenges is this document from OGC and Building Smart. The link's at the bottom. That's from this year, 2020. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What's being worked on? Another one is from the UK government. There's a broader about BIM interoperability expert group. What are the challenges? What do we need to work on? Some other things from the UK government. These are all free, about the broader context around how we need to be focused on people and creating a system of systems. Well, guess what? Geospatial features in there quite heavily. Something else from the UK government talking about data for the public good. That's from the National Infrastructure Commission. So again, a good read. It talks about the need for a national digital twin. It's being worked on. So this predates it. And it talked about several concepts, including geospatial and BIM, as you can see in here. Another report just to look at from now from 5 years ago, but still stands up very strongly, is from AGI, which is the UK's industry or membership professional body for geospatial professionals. Full site report from 2015, which talks about where things are going. And just the final slide here, just before I take a couple of questions, I realise we're running over, so apologies, but I will answer a couple of questions if that's okay. This slide is from the Centre for Digital Built Britain, which is funded from the UK government. So BEIS, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and the University of Cambridge, that's the Centre for Digital Built Britain, or CDBB. They're looking at the long-term strategic approach to how we improve the digitalization and digitization of the built environment, and how we improve how we go about things with lots of work I can barely mention because I haven't got enough time. But one of the slides here is talking about the end game is this national digital twin, as you can see on the right there. These other fundamental foundational levels of BIM, so that's about managing the information, all add into that. They all create, and we have this feedback loop. Another one for the purposes of today is obviously geospatial. So that's within the digital twin, you can see there on the right there. So there's a lot going on. It's all coming together. That's the purpose of this slide. Just to quickly leave you that there's different training courses. Again, I won't promote these now directly, but there's things occurring if you're interested. You can look me up, and I will just take some questions. I realize we're running over, but if I take a couple of questions. I'll just, there's quite a few questions here. So, okay, I tried catching up with BIM applications in different companies, no saying it's possible. Why? So there's a point here which I'll paraphrase just because of the way it's phrased, but it's about why isn't there consistency with BIM applications in different companies? Well, BIM in my context is the framework to how we manage information. It's not about the application as in the software. That's not what I mean by BIM. We don't mean that's a framework approach to how we procure, so buy, contract information and how we use it. What's missing is I guess the interoperability, the way we specify the actual data. So quite a few of the documents I showed you would tackle that side of it. To some extent, at some level, I wouldn't care what software people are using, depending what role I'm serving, mind you. it's about, is the data trustworthy? Does it come out in the right format, and that kind of aspect. So again, I can elaborate if people want to contact me directly, but that's what we should focus on. What would you say is more beneficial, SDI, CDE, so spatial data infrastructure, or CD? You need both, right? So spatial data infrastructure would be, as the name suggests, the spatial data infrastructure. A common data environment is a way of managing the information and controlling the information flow, and it's specified in the standard ISO 19650. Spatial data infrastructure obviously only relates to the spatial data. Now, I'm interested in lots of other data more than spatial data: documentation, certificates, certification, regulatory compliancy, photographs, records, as in legal records that you need to keep, whether they're PDF or paper. So there's a lot more going on. Would an SDI give me all of that? No way. Would the concept of a CDE capture all of that? It should do, and it could do. So yeah, you can kind of have both, if that makes sense. So do you think businesses will harness GeoBIM readiness? So I'm fully aware of the GeoBIM readiness, and I've obviously there's certain commercial companies coming out with that. Well, I wouldn't necessarily focus on GeoBIM. I probably made that point. I think that's where we're going down perhaps the wrong road there, in the sense that there is a international standard called ISO 19650, which talks about BIM, and there is a very mature international community of geospatial professionals who are talking to each other slowly, but we're getting there. Who I believe is missing are people like data scientists, information governance professionals. So that's people like me, information management professionals, who understand the bigger picture. People who understand things like master data management, or MDM. That's a very mature concept in IT and information management. People who only are focused on BIM and geospatial wouldn't necessarily have the right skills to have that conversation. So I'm nervous of going down the GeoBIM route, which is the takeaway message of this. If it gets people in the room to further the conversation, fine, but there's always going to be a gap. Business intelligence professionals, analytical people, I want them in the room as well. Not geospatial analytical people, I do want them, but just analytical people. So if you get my idea. But today is certainly focused on the geospatial. What I'm saying is we should work together, we can work together, it's happening. The question should now be, who else do we need to pull into the mix? How do we bridge the gap between BIM and geospatial? Get people in the room. So again, interoperability of data. So hopefully you've identified that that's being worked on with OGC and Building Smart International. Things like, I shouldn't really name products, but I will. There's products like FME by Safe Software, and this is an ETL tool, so you could convert or transform data. And also Esri, ESRI are working with Autodesk as well, and there's other things going on, right? That's just to name two. So the data isn't infinitely complex to resolve. The data interoperability extension, for example, in the Esri solutions, for example, you can model it. The challenge is the language. So that hopefully the point that's come across is, how do we get people in the same room? If I write a standard, would it mean the same thing to a survey professional as it would to a GIS professional, as it would to a design professional with a CAD background? So I think we need to keep the conversation, and I better just finish up the last two questions because I'm probably out of my time. But is there a risk? Let me just read this quickly and then paraphrase it, because it's a long question. Is there a risk of loss in bureaucracy of data with the parameters? So yeah, so it's about the complexity of software. So I will read it actually, but I was just going to paraphrase it, but I think I probably will read it. Yeah, I think there is a risk, this is more an observation, a risk of loss in bureaucracy of data behind the parameters that are hidden in failing menus inside a little triangle. Oh, okay, someone's commenting on the slide. Okay, it's fine. So friendlier software, absolutely. Their point is there's maybe some complexity missed there, and I agree. I think that example was on specific softwares. I give you that. That's not the conversation I have normally as a consultant or when I'm hopefully tutoring. I don't name products. I focus not to. I name products, so that was very specific. If people want to focus on products, that's the wrong conversation to have with me, because although I might implement certain products, that's a conversation we have later on. It's about what are the needs of the data, what do we need to answer, what are the decisions, what should we be doing with the data? And as far as a friendlier software, well, within reason, don't want to get too carried away, I could use any software or the favored software, if that makes sense. If I'm absolutely clear on the data standards, the way I'm going to transform or convert the data and share the data and have control, if people have a preferred tool and it's appropriate and we can validate why they're using it, I wouldn't mind what modeling tool they're using. So it depends which way you look at it. So for example, highly simplified web applications may or may not be the way of capturing certain data. So for example, someone's location with differential GPS or RTK real-time kinematic, which would correct their location. It might be they could use a smartphone with this correction device. They might not be using a piece of survey equipment, traditional survey. So yeah, so that's a piece of sort of open-ended question about the technology. Why do we need to learn again geospatial BIM software? Yeah, so there isn't any geospatial software. It says, why do we all need to learn again about geospatial/BIM software? Twins are not a solution. I think we should promote the BIM platform. Yeah, okay, so they're talking about BIM platform. I'm not advocating any software whatsoever, although I might have named some purely for example's sake. It's not about that. It's about, I'm an information management professional. It's abstracting the conversation. So raising the conversation to business process data as on its own, not where it lives. So I could say, for example, the single source truth or the master data may be in two systems. That wouldn't be ideal, I'll give you that, but there might be the geometry, the spatial geometry of something plus some attributes of let's say a building, for example, that should naturally exist in different systems. So a finance system or a project management system, and the geometry in one system or in two, and then I would bring them together. It would be probably completely inappropriate for me to hold the master record of finance for let's say a bridge project within a 3D modeling software. That's not something I would do. Maybe it's something you could do. So yeah, don't get tied into the software. It's not about that. It's about trying to not talk about the software and say, look, if we could have any software we wanted, or we didn't know the name of any softwares, what would be the optimal way of working? And that looks like a process. It looks like a workflow. It looks like standards. It looks like a policy. It looks like people collaborating without naming the software. That comes afterwards. So I think I've done with the questions here. If there's any more, please. I realize I've run over, so apologies for that, but I'd better turn it back over. Any more questions? You've got my details on screen there, so please do ask me. But it's an iterative process. It's a conversation, and it's certainly not concluded yet. But the fact that people want to talk about geospatial and BIM coming together is the main point for me. So with that, thank you for your time and your attention, and I'll hand back. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and a big thank you as well to all of our panelists for joining us today. A massive thank you as well to everyone who joined in the audience for the session. You'll all receive an on-demand copy of today's session via email. If you have any feedback or any further questions at all, please email info@festivalofdigitalconstruction.com and we'll come back to you later this week. Our next webinar will be taking place on September 2nd at 4 p.m. UK time, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard. This will include a panel discussion on thriving, not just surviving, the new normal. Why digitising is the answer. You can sign up for this via our website. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar and we'll see you at the next one.